and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and coming up on today's programme, we'll be discussing today's mayoral election in New York. This is the US President Donald Trump gives his backing to the independent candidate Andrew Cuomo, not the Republican Party's candidate Curtis Sliwa. President Trump says that if the Democratic candidate Zohran Mamdani wins, he'll hold back federal funds for the city. Plus, we'll be taking a look back at the life and the legacy of the former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, whose death was announced today at the age of 84. Hello and welcome to the programme. The US President Donald Trump has further inserted himself into New York's city mayoral race, strongly backing the former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo for mayor and threatening to cut funds to the city if the Democratic candidate Zohran Mamdani wins. Well, President Trump has labelled Mamdani a communist. That's a description which Mamdani himself rejects.
The funding for New York and for every place comes through the White House. And I'm very generous, and I was always very generous with New York, even when you had opposition there, but I was always very generous. But I wouldn't be generous to a communist, a guy that's going to take the money and throw it out the window, because you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. And we're not going to let somebody get into office and squander the taxpayer money from this country.
President Trump speaking there, while Zohran Mamdani, who describes himself as a democratic socialist, spoke ahead of Election Day, commenting on President Trump's support for his rival Cuomo. Let's take a listen.
Donald Trump just put out a statement encouraging New Yorkers, saying they must vote for Andrew Cuomo. We know and have known for months that Donald Trump would favor Andrew Cuomo as the mayor. They share the same donors. They share the same small vision. They share the same sense of impunity. And yet in these final days, what was rumored, what was feared has become naked and unabashed. The MAGA movement's embrace of Andrew Cuomo is reflective of Donald Trump's understanding that this would be the best mayor for him. Not the best mayor for New York City, not the best mayor for New Yorkers, but the best mayor for Donald Trump as his administration. I would invite you to look at another man who endorsed Andrew Cuomo today, Elon Musk.
Well, to discuss this mayoral race, we're joined now by David Cay Johnston, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, formerly with the New York Times, also a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're also joined by Amanda Makki, a Republican strategist and channel regular, who joins us from Florida. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for joining us. Amanda, let me start by asking you, who do you think would be the best mayor for New York?
Well, who I think would be the best mayor for New York is someone who could turn around a city that has clearly led to the demise with security issues, safety issues, and obviously the city has become more expensive. So that, I think, is what the front runner, Zohran Mamdani, has tapped into, is the financial hardships that people are facing in the city of New York. But the answer is not raising taxes. So my hope for New Yorkers would have been someone who would not raise their taxes, but understands the safety and security needs of, America's city. And we all love New York, but we're all also worried about being in New York for our own safety and security, and the tourism there obviously has suffered because of that. And so someone who can identify that and fix it would have been the best candidate without increasing people's taxes so that people flee the city of New York.
Amanda, there are three names on the ballot. Which one did you have in mind then?
Well, I'm going with who President Trump said. I'm not friends with him and I don't like him, but, Cuomo would have been the most moderate.
Okay.
Had the best chance of winning. The Republican obviously doesn't have a chance of winning, Curtis Sliwa. But, for who could win, it would have to be a Democrat. And the least, the worst option is definitely Zohran Mamdani.
Okay, let me ask David, who's a little closer to where the voting is taking place today. David, what are your thoughts?
Well, New York City is one of the safest cities in the United States. And like most big cities, crime in New York compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago, even during Donald Trump's first term, crime is down dramatically from those times. This is a narrative constantly sold by Republicans that has no basis in fact. The person who's going to win pretty clearly will be Mamdani. Last weekend, 10 days ago, there were rallies held by Cuomo and Mamdani. Cuomo drew 300 people. Mamdani drew 13,000 people, and there's a record amount of early voting. And the reason I think Mamdani is succeeding is that he's doing what Democrats haven't been doing. Democrats have been focused on getting rid of Donald Trump. Mamdani says, elect me, and if you live in a neighborhood with no grocery stores, we will subsidize or have the city run grocery stores so you can buy healthy food in a reliable way. Bus rides are $2.90 each now, $3. We're going to make buses free, which the mayor has the power to do if he can find the money to do it. He's going to freeze rents for people who live in what are rent-controlled apartments. That can work as a short-term strategy. In the long run, it undercuts the market and is damaging. But I think the core of this election is about, are you going to be running against Donald Trump if you're not a Republican or you're a disaffected Republican? Or are you going to say, here's what we will do for you to make your life better? As Amanda pointed out, that's a key element of Mamdani's appeal.
Right. And Amanda, I mean, there we just heard from David, Mamdani is going to address the cost of living issue, the affordability issue of living in New York, which is at the forefront of the minds of New Yorkers. I mean, why isn't he the man for the job?
Well, all of that takes a tax base to draw from. Also, you have to work with the governor on some of these things. As David mentioned, he has to find the money for this. So all of these things are great ideas. Anyone would want to support these ideas, but there's also a really important lingering question of how you pay for it. So, you can be Zohran Mamdani, who wants to promise the world to everyone. And that's what people have basically bought into. They're buying into the hope that he's, providing them. Whether that bears out is really anyone's question. But I still think that the underlying issue of safety and security is incredibly important. Someone who wants to defund the police, someone who is not supportive of the police. And I say this as having had a conversation on the plane with a NYPD detective who is an African-American woman herself. And she said, I am not voting for him because he doesn't like me or my profession. He doesn't like cops, and he's not going to be supportive of us. I thought that was very interesting. And the second question that I posed to her was, do you feel safe in New York? And she said, no, I don't. New York is not safe. So I understand what statistics will say, but statistics can't fight the feelings that people have of insecurity when they feel like, I don't feel safe going on a train. What could happen to me and what I have to be exposed with? Now, people do it every day because they have to. They don't have an alternative. But those are the types of things that I believe a lot of New Yorkers are also still concerned about. But it's already a done deal. Zohran Mamdani is going to win. If the numbers are right, you have 400 people going to see Cuomo and 13,000 people going to see Mamdani. He's clearly tapped into something that has struck a nerve. I mean, in a lot of ways, maybe like a Trump, in a lot of ways, maybe like an Obama, where people are just excited about this person and excited to hear him speak and watch him. Politics is a very visual sport as well. And so maybe people don't care about the issues necessarily, but they like him. They like that he's young, and they like that he thinks outside the box. And I think that's giving actually Democrats a lot of heartache, because they want to separate themselves and say he's the Democrat socialist. He's not a Democrat, when in fact he's a Democrat. And mark my words, Republicans will use him as the leader of the party for the next year of campaigning for the midterm elections.
Okay, David, lots for you to pick up on there. And also I want to ask you, is Mamdani a communist in your opinion? Because that's what Donald Trump says.
No, he's not. And to be a democratic socialist simply means that you want to have private sector running the economy, but you want to have rules in place like we see in Western Europe that insulate ordinary people from the ups and downs of business and predatory actions by those among the business community who are bad characters. But Amanda's quite right that the test of this will be, can Mamdani deliver when he's in office? He's demonstrated a significant understanding of how government works and a deep understanding of the New York City Charter and how it intersects with state laws. But can he pull this off? And I would also point out that what I don't hear Republicans doing is saying, the murder rate in Jackson, Mississippi, in a deep red state, is 4 times the rate in New York City. They keep pointing to New York City. And well, I don't think Amanda has done this. Many Republicans do this in a way that's blatantly racist. It's, there are black people there. There are Muslims there. There's plenty of video of this going on around the country. Fox has lots of it that does that. And I think that's very troubling. New York is a multicultural city, and it is an enormous revenue center for the federal government. Lower Manhattan produces about $30 billion a year more than it gets in benefits every year from the federal government. New York is this enormous economic engine for the entire country, and indeed it has global effects. So it matters a lot what conditions are in New York City. But again, New York is one of the safest places in America, and crime is way down. And let me give you an example from another city. When I was investigating the LAPD 45 years ago for the LA Times, I spent 3 years doing that. There were 1,000 murders a year. Now in LA, there are 300 murders a year. America has become much, much less violent than it was in the past. And if you go back to the 1920s, it is stunning how much less violent America is today. And by running on a campaign of, I'm going to address your economic problems, free buses, grocery stores in your neighborhood, dealing with rents, what Mamdani was proposing in the long run, if he can pull it off, is even lower crime rates, because so much of crime is driven by economic necessity. We've now lived through a half century that I document every single year, in which we have created enormous new wealth in this country. We are really good at creating wealth. My books on the economy champion competitive market capitalism, but because we have adopted, under primarily Republicans, corporate socialism as our model, what we're seeing is that the bottom 90% of Americans today are worse off than they were in 1973. In fact, the Rand Corporation, a think tank started by the U.S. Air Force, concluded in a study that in 2018, if America had the same income and wealth distribution as 1973, 90% of Americans' incomes would have been 67% higher, 2/3 higher. It's government policies that are pushing down the wages and have raised the taxes of the bottom 90% of Americans. That's the core problem. And on the large political scale, the issue is, are the Democrats at the top nationally going to continue to just be, we need to get rid of this convicted felon in the White House? And are they going to say, here, if you put us in the majority, we will do this and that for you?
Okay, Amanda, you're welcome to pick up on any of that. I also wanted to ask you about this threat by President Trump, which is he's going to cut off federal funding to New York in the event that Mamdani wins. I mean, how's that going to be helpful?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that President Trump, what maybe he was trying to articulate, if I can guess and speculate, is that he's not going to support the positions that Mamdani is going to take for the city. And he's not going to be in line with whatever Mamdani's doing. And I don't think he's going to piecemeal go after things that are, New Yorkers benefit from, that every American benefits from. But I do think that he's going to make sure that anything that Mamdani wants to pursue, he's probably not going to be in lockstep with him. He's not going to further that because he's not in agreement with anything Mamdani's doing.
Again, David, I mean, I gather that the federal government provides about $7.4 billion US dollars to New York City. That's about 6.5% of its budget. I mean, how much of a blow would it be if that money was cut off? And is it even legal to cut that funding off?
Well, first of all, yeah, Donald constantly claims that under Article 2 of the American Constitution, I can do anything I want. That's not true. Read it. It essentially says the president is the errand boy of Congress and will do what Congress has told him to do. He is trying to turn himself into what he is at the moment, which is a de facto dictator, and he's consolidating his power, his dictatorial powers, which I've written extensively about. And of course, I've known Donald for almost 40 years. New York City does get about $7 billion every year from the federal government, but it generates more than $30 billion for the federal government. So let's keep that in mind. Trump certainly will try to find ways to hamstring and cut off funds or audit to death actions in New York City. None of those are appropriate for a president, but they are absolutely what we should expect from someone who perceives himself to be a dictator.
Amanda, do you think people are going to flee New York if Mamdani gets in?
Well, let's just also discuss how courts are going to be involved in this. So it's not like Donald Trump can just do anything that he wants. The courts will step in as they have. So let's be objective about how the government process works here. But also with regards to what people are kind of jokingly calling the realtor of the year in Florida is Zohran Mamdani, because people do believe that Florida is going to be the beneficiary of people with wealth leaving New York to come to the state of Florida. So obviously we saw that happen during the time of COVID. People wanted to get away from the rule of, not being able to congregate, especially the Hasidic Jewish communities came to Florida to get set up here with all of the things that they need for their, for their religious beliefs. And so, a lot of people did flee for that reason, not being able to congregate, not being able to work, all of those things. They came to Florida. We've had a little bit of, people leaving since then. Florida has gotten expensive. We did have 3 hurricanes during that time, major hurricanes. But I do see people moving back to Florida from New York because of their concern for what Mamdani might do. And again, I keep bringing at it from the angle of maybe because I'm a woman, I keep talking about how, a city that's dangerous, a city that people don't feel safe in. If a mayor is not supporting the police the way the police force believes they need to be supported, people are going to leave.
Okay, David, is that something you're hearing from a lot of people around you? That, first of all, the police are under-supported, the streets, even if statistically they're safe, they don't feel safe, and that people are reconsidering where they want to live and might leave the city. Is that something you're hearing?
I don't think we're going to see any change, Tom, in what's been a pattern for decades, and that is older Americans who've made a lot of money leave New York and they go to Florida or Arizona or other places which have fewer government services. That's why they have lower taxes. You wouldn't want to educate your children in Florida when you can get them educated like mine were and got virtually a private school education because they went to such excellent public schools in New York. But Amanda's right that when she says that district courts, the first trial courts that hear cases, have been backing the public against Donald Trump's dictatorial moves. Circuit courts have done that. The Supreme Court, however, has been siding with Trump and doing so in a very devious way. What they do is say, well, we're going to stop this injunction or temporary restraining order, but the litigation can continue. And that basically allows Trump to continue doing things that are outside of the scope of Article 2 of the Constitution, which governs the president. But the pattern in New York that people leave when they're older is very common. By the way, according to Kiplinger's, which is a financial advice magazine that's been around for more than 100 years, if you're relatively poor, New York City is actually one of the very best places to live because there are so many services that are available without charge. The issue is, can you find housing you can afford? If you already own your place or you are able to get a rent-controlled apartment, living in New York City is cheaper than living in many cities, any city in Florida, if you have to own a car. Owning a car alone costs about $9,000 a year for the average American household, all in. So not having to have a car can be a great boon to people. But, the proof of Mamdani, and it's not Mamdani, it's Mamdani, is going to be in the performance. If he performs, his influence is going to grow, and we're going to see a shift in politics in this country, somewhat more toward Western Europe where you don't have people go bankrupt over medical bills, turned from taxpayers into tax eaters because we won't spend the money to fix somebody up after an accident, they break a hand or a leg. It's one of the unfortunate products of the Republicans' we can't raise taxes policy is we literally convert every year tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of people from taxpayers into tax eaters because we're not willing to provide them with the rehabilitative medical care they need after something happens to them. And if Mamdani fails, then I think we'll see a different direction. But if he succeeds, it's going to cause Democrats and Republicans across the country to say, oh, wait a minute. And at the core of this, I firmly believe, and my best-selling economics books address this, that the Democrats' big mistake has been they haven't come up with policies that say, elect us, and we're going to make conditions better for you.
Okay, Amanda, back at you. I mean, just picking up on what you were saying earlier on, I mean, it sounds to me like you've written off Cuomo's chances of winning. I don't know if that's right, and you seem to be thinking that Mamdani is indeed going to win. I mean, we're about a year away, aren't we, from the midterms in the United States? I mean, does this vote in New York in any way give us any clues about the mood of American voters right now?
Yeah, I do believe that this is really more of an issue that it divides the Democrats than anything that we could look at for a partisan issue between Republicans and Democrats. New York City was never in play for Republicans. That's a fact. So it was really only ever going to be held by someone who was more extreme, a communist, as President Trump would say, Democrat, socialist, however you want to part and parcel that. It was not going to be someone who was more mainstream, like a Cuomo, someone who was a traditional, maybe blue dog Democrat, as we would call them in the United States. And so I think that this is really a rift between the Democratic Party. This has nothing to involve the Republican Party with. And this is going to be something where they have to figure out, you know, is the Democratic Party focused on making my life more affordable? Or are they focused on abortion rights and woke things that deal with, you know, cultural issues? You know, who uses the boys' bathroom? Who uses the girls' bathroom? Is that the hill they want to die on? Because that is clearly, I believe, where the Democrats have failed in their party, is that they focused on these issues. Kamala Harris's presidential ambitions were a perfect example of this, focusing on things that didn't matter to the people who were just trying to put food on the table, gas in their cars, and being able to hold a steady job. So the Democratic Party needs to focus on, are we going to be the idea of, you know, how important it is to focus on LGBTQ and abortion and social issues? Or are we going to focus on the pain that people are feeling every time they have to, you know, buy groceries? And that's really an issue for the Democrats to decide. And yes, it is very clear to me who is going to win. I think to anyone at this point, it's clear who's going to win today. And I think what they tried to do was at least consolidate, if they could get Curtis Sliwa, the Republican, out of the race, to have his votes go to Cuomo, and they still were going to come up short. So this was really a race for Mamdani to win all along, it seemed like.
Okay, I mean, just to wrap up, because I'm being told we're out of time. I mean, the Democratic Party, David, I mean, they seem to be coming across, and I think even by their own admission, somewhat in the wilderness at the moment. You know, a lot of people must be a little cautious about lurching too far to the left with Mamdani. So what's wrong with Cuomo as an outcome? Wouldn't everyone be happy with that?
Well, Andrew Cuomo is a very competent administrator and leader. The problem is that he's disgraced himself and he's infuriated lots of people with his behavior, both in official behavior in office and how he treats people. But no one would question that he's competent, but clearly he's lost any popular appeal. Amanda's quite right about the Democrats. The Democrats need to focus on an economic message. But let me point out that it's the Democrats who are the party of freedom. It's the Republicans now whose policies are anti-freedom, wanting to, for example, end DEI, scrubbing from websites of the federal government winners of valorous awards for combat if they're women or minorities. And so the Democrats, however, haven't positioned themselves that way. They don't know how to market. And the Republicans are brilliant at marketing. The Democrats are being told, they've been told for 3 decades, you got to learn how to market. Donald Trump gets up and he understands viscerally how to appeal to people. Even as he says wages are too high, which should turn people away, he says, we love you. I alone can save you. What do the Democrats do? Hakeem Jeffries in a monotone says, we have a plan, and if you'll turn to page 14 at footnote 4, you will see that doesn't appeal to people. They have to learn marketing if they want to be successful in broad terms. They're going to win some important races tomorrow, not just in New York City, but to get control of Congress back, they've got to have an economic message the way FDR did, who basically, his policies created and sustained the middle class. The policies in America from 1948, the year I was born, until 1975, doubled in real terms the income of the bottom 90% of Americans. And since 1973, flat to falling for the bottom 90% overall. The Democrats need to learn, A, how to market, B, how to present an economic message. And, they don't make any point about the fact that Donald Trump was the first president in 100 years to lose jobs in this country. Joe Biden's administration created 15 million jobs. In fact, Barack Obama created more jobs were created under Barack Obama once the Great Recession ended than under Donald Trump before COVID. But the Democrats don't seem to be able to figure out how to exploit that. So marketing and messaging, as Amanda points out, are absolutely crucial, and putting too much emphasis on the freedom of people who don't fit norms like LGBTQ. I think Democrats should be in support of people who don't fit a norm, who have a different religious view than the majority of Americans. But putting that out as your front message, that's just leading with your chin in a boxing match and saying, please, knock me out.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. David, you had the last word. Amanda, you had the first word. Amanda Makki, thank you very much indeed to you. David Cay Johnston, thank you to you as well.
Thanks, Tom.
Take care.
Now, it was announced today that the former U.S. Secretary of Defense and the former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney has died. Cheney, who served as vice president under President George W. Bush from 2001 to 2009, was seen as a driving force behind the U.S. invasion of Iraq in March 2003. He was also viewed by some analysts as having been one of the most powerful vice presidents in U.S. history. Well, Dick Cheney has died at the age of 84. Well, for more, we can speak now to Ambassador James Jeffrey, who's a former Deputy National Security Advisor under President George W. Bush. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. You served as U.S. Ambassador to Turkey and Albania under President Bush. You were also the U.S. Ambassador to Iraq under President Obama. Do correct me if I'm wrong on any of that. A pleasure talking to you. What was your level of interaction with Vice President Dick Cheney as he was, and what will be your lasting memory of him?
Thanks for having me on, first of all. I was also, most importantly for this interview, Deputy National Security Advisor in the White House and dealt with him every day for 2 years. Dick Cheney was an elemental force in American policy, both domestic and, in particular, from my standpoint, foreign policy. In the end, President Bush was a strong leader and made the decisions, but Dick Cheney had a tremendous impact on him, particularly in the first term. The combination of Cheney and Rumsfeld, and they go back all the way to the Ford and Nixon administrations. They dominated foreign policy and pushed us into, in some ways, very strong confrontations, more so than we otherwise would have with Islam in general and in Iraq. Nonetheless, he will be remembered as one of the most important Republican figures of the last 50 years.
There were some who described him as having been the CEO of that Bush presidency. Would you agree with that assessment?
Again, I found President Bush to be a very strong leader, particularly in his second term. also in his second term, after he had fired Don Rumsfeld, and Dick Cheney was very unhappy about that, I found that more and more Cheney was sidelined, at least in foreign policy decisions, because the president turned to Steve Hadley, the national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, and Bob Gates, the Secretary of Defense, for most of his policies, for most of his recommendations. Cheney wanted to take a much stronger line against Iran, a much stronger line against Russia. The president wasn't willing to do this. He was totally tied up with 2 wars already, and he didn't want a third or a fourth.
Of course, he was a leading advocate of the invasion of Iraq. And I'm just wondering whether you think that is perhaps the defining factor in his legacy. What are your thoughts?
Not exactly, because, look, in 1998, Congress passed overwhelmingly the Iraq Liberation Act, and President Clinton signed off on it. There was a broad consensus, believe it or not, in America that going into Iraq in 2003 was the right thing to do. Cheney was one of the leading advocates of it, but there was, again, broad support, including among the Democrats in Congress. Nonetheless, what he was a supporter of, and here there was a difference with President Bush, Condoleezza Rice, and other advisors, he didn't believe in the democracy agenda, which President Bush believed in his soul and heart. Cheney reminds me more of Kissinger, a little bit of Trump, but less isolationist, and maybe more of a Roman proconsul. You've got to make the rest of the world fear you if you want to maintain your top position. And for Cheney, America maintaining the top position, particularly militarily, was the core foreign policy goal.
In terms of his skill set, as someone who worked closely with him and who saw him up close and personal, what would you say his strongest hand was? What was he best at?
First of all, he was very self-confident and very, very knowledgeable. He had been the chief of staff to Gerald Ford. He had been the Secretary of Defense for George Bush Sr. He had risen to the very top of the Republicans in Congress. So he had a tremendous resume, and he was respected for that. The other thing is, and here I would contrast him perhaps unfairly in the case of Rumsfeld with Don Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld was very difficult to deal with. Cheney was personally kind. He was calm. He would accept his defeats, and I saw him get a lot of defeats in the last years of the Bush administration. He didn't pull rank. He didn't say, hey, I'm the vice president, let's end this conversation. He would listen to everybody. And so he was actually pleasant to work with, even if one disagreed with him, and often we did, on policies.
Is there one vignette or one scene that perhaps in your mind overshadows all the others as perhaps being the most memorable moment or memorable encounter with Dick Cheney?
Yes, I was the acting national security advisor with Bush in Beijing for the Olympics, which turned out to be very serious because Russia invaded Georgia. And I was trotted out to give a press conference. And in the press conference, I was asked a question which I hadn't prepared for, although I should have thought of it, which was, are we prepared to rule out the use of force? And I said, the United States never rules out the use of force because that's a kind of fallback position. So I immediately get a call from Cheney saying, great, did the president authorize this? And I had to sadly disappoint him and say, no, this was Jim Jeffries' idea.
There are some who say he made a lasting impact on the U.S. vice presidency, one that's even felt to this day. I mean, what do you think of that? And how do you think history will remember him?
Well, history will, rather like Henry Kissinger. I just did a review of the PBS Henry Kissinger memorial series. These people who emerged, as I did, from the turmoil of the 1960s and 70s in America, Vietnam, Watergate, and so on, they remain controversial figures. There's no doubt about it. There will never be a final historical judgment of Dick Cheney. I do not think that he contributed to a strengthened role of the vice presidency, because we certainly saw neither Joe Biden, although he was a very active vice president, nor Kamala Harris, nor Vice President Pence play a role anything like that. I think that J.D. Vance is trying to do that, but the jury is still out on whether he'll reach anything like the level that Dick Cheney reached. It was unique, I think, in post-war American history.
Just tell us, lastly, your own personal memory of working with Dick Cheney. I mean, what goes through your mind when you look back on your time working closely with him?
I was, in terms of policies, very closely aligned with Gates, Hadley, and Rice. And that was where the president was, which to some degree was my job, but we have our own personal responsibility to advise and think. And I was aligned with them, but at the time and ever since, particularly as we have watched over those 20 years from 2000 forward, Iran, Russia, and China, in a way, eat our lunch. Move aggressively ever more. We see the situation that's now stable for the moment with China. Let's hope it stays that way after the president's trip to Asia. We see this raging war of Russian aggression in Ukraine. And up until they were dramatically defeated, we had seen an Iranian march through the entire Middle East. I'm not so sure now, looking back, Dick Cheney was all that wrong.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, he was somewhat estranged from the Republican Party of today. How do you think he will be remembered in the ranks of the current GOP leadership?
Donald Trump doesn't spend much time identifying himself with antecedents, be they Reagan, be they Eisenhower, be they Cheney, be they the Bush family. Among other Republicans, particularly in the Congress, especially in the Senate, that kind of Dick Cheney Republican Party, very anti-isolationist, somewhat more moderate than some of the things we see with the Trump administration. That still has a foothold in the party. It's somewhat undercover right now, but it will emerge.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Ambassador James Jeffrey, thank you very much indeed, sir. Well, we're joined now by Reed Gallen, who's the co-founder of the Lincoln Project and a former strategist for George W. Bush, John McCain and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. He was described as having been one of the most powerful and polarizing vice presidents in U.S. history. What do you make of that?
Well, I would say that both of those things are true. I started working for Vice President Cheney during the 2000 campaign when he was President Bush's running mate. And what I would say is that there were very few people I ever came across who knew more about how the federal government worked, from the White House down to the lowest guy sitting at a desk in an agency or a committee somewhere than Dick Cheney. I would also say my experience was that he was very involved in all facets of policy, at least from my small perch, in which if he had a difference of opinion with the president's staff, then there was a very good chance that he was going to go directly to the president. And that is something no one else in the White House could do.
Some people described him as having been the CEO of George W. Bush's presidency. I don't know if you agree with that assessment, and just how much influence do you think he wielded?
Well, I'm not sure about the CEO moniker, but I do know that he had a very expansive belief in the executive, that the presidency and the administration should and can do what it feels like it needs to do, especially in the auspices of national security, which was such a focus of Bush's presidency after 9/11. So I think that he definitely had a perspective on those things. Whether or not he was the CEO, I'm not necessarily sure. I think that, for maybe a COO. Cheney did not like to be out front. He was someone who was very much someone who would much rather have had his counsel given and received in private rather than in public. I remember that the events that I attended with him, he much preferred speaking to a small group of people than to a crowd. He preferred individual conversations, as I recall. And so I think that, maybe chief operating officer. But again, remember, in the United States, the vice presidency has only two jobs: break a tie in the U.S. Senate when that happens, and wait for a terrible phone call. And from a historic perspective, Cheney vastly expanded the bounds of what the vice presidency was.
Yeah, I was going to say, what mark did he make on the vice presidency? It sounds like you've already answered it. And how have we seen that change reflected in the vice presidents we've seen since him?
I think we've gone back to a much more traditional vice presidency in which there are things that the vice president is involved in. He or she can certainly attend, I would say, any meeting they wanted to. But for the most part, they are there to carry the message for the White House and for the president, to provide counsel that very few other people can. Remember, the vice president's the one person in the White House or the government the president can't fire. But again, it is a much more specific and narrow role since Dick Cheney. Hard to believe that many presidents would want or favor something like the Cheney vice presidency represented.
I mean, from what you're telling me about him not particularly relishing in being in the public eye, I mean, am I right in thinking he never had his eye on the top job in the United States?
Well, he did briefly decide he wanted to run in 1993 and 1994. But following that, he chose to, go into private industry. And I think that was, frankly, probably the right move. He was a mastermind at political knife fighting and bureaucratic infighting, but he was not a traditional politician. He was not going to hand out candy. He was not going to kiss babies. That was never going to be his strong suit. He could deliver one-liners very, very well. He had a very wry sense of humor, but he was never going to be someone on the stump who was going to rally a crowd of 20,000 people to their feet.
And we're more than 20 years on now since the invasion of Iraq. And of course, Dick Cheney was a leading advocate of that invasion. Do you think that is probably the most significant issue that will define his legacy? What do you think?
I think it will be both national and domestic security, in which he and a lot of the people around him, and frankly, the President Bush as well, saw 9/11 and then the subsequent invasion of Iraq also as a necessity to increase domestic surveillance of American citizens with the Patriot Act, the formation of the Department of Homeland Security, and all of the things that ultimately Edward Snowden brought to light under the Obama administration. And so I think that, yes, Iraq will probably be the lever around which he is seen, simply because he and now the late Donald Rumsfeld were such proponents of an invasion of Iraq really right after 9/11. It was always on their list of things to do. And unfortunately, 9/11, for so many reasons, gave them the opportunity to press that case, not only to the president himself, but also to the American people.
And of course, this issue of the unfound weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was very much the justification for that Iraq war and the invasion of Iraq. Did he ever express any remorse, or did he ever publicly reconsider his position on that issue?
Not that I recall. I did read in one of the obituaries this morning that at some point, even he gave up saying that Iraq was about weapons of mass destruction, that it had been so thoroughly debunked that it wasn't a worthy talking point anymore. And I hate to make invasion of a country a talking point, but I think that ultimately he knew that that was a reasoning that was not going to hold any credibility or any water with anybody who had any real understanding of what happened over there.
And one of the obituaries I read said that he defended the use of torture and stood by that. I mean, is that something that hung over him as being perhaps a legacy-defining issue?
I would say that of all of the things about Dick Cheney, and there are many, that is one that is certainly potent, but I'm not sure how well known it will be. I think probably more well known would be the opposition to another former boss of mine, John McCain, who obviously suffered severe torture in North Vietnam during his captivity. But again, I don't think a shining moment for America, either from a moral perspective or an intelligence perspective. As we know, torture rarely produces the results that people want because, as you know, people will say anything they want to get it to stop.
Yeah, we've just had a reaction coming into us while we've been talking. The former U.S. President George W. Bush calling Dick Cheney's death, quote, a loss to the nation, a sorrow to his friends. One of his friends probably wasn't Donald Trump. And, you know, it seems like he wasn't really on the best terms with President Trump. He said he was, in fact, going to vote for Kamala Harris last year. Why did Dick Cheney not see eye to eye with Donald Trump?
Well, I think there were a few things. First and foremost, I think the fact that President Trump had gone out of his way to say bad things about Cheney's daughter, Liz, who was a member of Congress from his home state of Wyoming. She had served on the January 6th committee. She had been thrown out of Republican leadership and then subsequently lost her seat in Wyoming. And I think that they saw Trump as a dangerous break. And I think that I probably agree with some of this, with what America's place in the world had been and what the rule of law meant. But I think that there was very much a dual feeling about Trump from Cheney's side, which was one of it was very personal, and the other one was someone who was hell-bent on dismantling a system that Dick Cheney was a core part of, going back to when he was the youngest chief of staff at the White House in the 1970s at 34.
So clearly, Dick Cheney was estranged from the GOP as it is today. I mean, we had reaction, as I said earlier, from the former President George W. Bush. But what sort of reaction do you think we'll get from the Republican Party leadership today?
Well, let me just tell you, I was in London last year doing an event, and I was sitting next to a young man who was a very, very, how would I say it, enthusiastic member of the MAGA coalition. And he said, I heard you worked for Dick Cheney. And I said, yes. He said, if we had it my way, he'd be in The Hague. And so I think that that's how you see it, which is he is first and foremost seen as a paragon of a system that they loathe, but also of, you know, the antithesis of what I think that some MAGA members, a lot of MAGA members have, is a more isolationist worldview, that the United States should not go into foreign wars for no reason, something that Donald Trump is now threatening to do on multiple locations. So I think that there will be very little love lost and very little mourning out of MAGA or Donald Trump, for that matter, for Vice President Cheney.
And Reed, just before we wrap up, I mean, you said you'd met Dick Cheney on a number of occasions. It sounds like you accompanied him on various engagements. How will you remember him?
He was, look, as a staffer, he was always very nice. He, you know, if you did your job, he was happy. I would say that there were moments where he was never going to be, look, you know, when you're vice president of the United States or running to be vice president of the United States, you got a lot on your mind. But there was no one who knew more about what was going on than him. And there were times when he could be uproariously funny, but he did it in such a dry and deadpan manner that you had to sort of take a step back and go, wait, was he just funny? And so I think that was also, like, I have the rosy glasses of nostalgia helping me out. When I worked for him, it was pre 9/11. It was pre-Iraq. It was pre the financial meltdown. It was a different time. It was a more, frankly, innocent time for me anyway. And so those are the memories I have, which obviously many people won't share. But you can only remember the things that you saw in person. And for me, you know, I wish his legacy would be different, but here we are.
All right, we really appreciate you sharing that with us. Reed Gallant, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Meanwhile, the former top lawyer for the Israeli military has been arrested as a political showdown deepens over a leaked video that shows a Palestinian detainee apparently being abused by Israeli soldiers. Well, Major General Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi, who was forced to resign last week, said she took full responsibility for the leak because she wanted, she said, the public to understand just how serious this case was. Well, staying with Gaza, Israel has confirmed that the bodies of 3 more deceased Israeli soldiers have been returned via the International Red Cross. Well, meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces have carried out raids in several areas this evening. That's according to local media reports. Well, we can speak now to Michael Kleiner, who is an Israeli politician, who is the leader of the Herut Party. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Mr. Kleiner. I'd like to start by asking you about President Trump's 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza. We've entered phase 2 now. I mean, what's your assessment of where we are and what progress has been made?
First of all, there is a big progress. There is a ceasefire. A little shaky, but it's strong enough. Both sides are interested, and President Trump is interested, and we are eagerly waiting to the continuation because this was our desire for the last 77 years since the establishment of State of Israel to start a serious negotiation towards a permanent peace in the Middle East.
Okay. I mean, in terms of where we go to from here and with regards to the framework set out by President Trump's plan, what do you view as being the major obstacles at this particular stage?
I don't think that in this stage there are obstacles. The obstacle is that, Israel has problems with the issue of creating a hostile state in the heart of our land in Judea and Samaria. We had an experience in 2005 when we actually left Gaza, created a Palestinian state in Gaza. There was no soldiers, no settlers left there. And you see what they did, all the time making a build-up, both in education and in gathering arms towards the 7th of October. And if this will happen in Judea and Samaria, it will be which you call the West Bank is much more dangerous. It's actually an existential threat of the state of Israel. And instead, President Trump understands it, and he knows that the Israeli public, which until the 7th of October, half of it supported the idea of some demilitarized Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, now, after 7th of October, 90% of the Israeli population are opposed to it. So if this is a condition of Saudi Arabia, it's a problem. President Trump, the day before yesterday, said on his 60-minute program that, it's not sure, it can be this, can be something else. He has to speak with Israel, with himself. So I understand that also, as long as President Trump understands that this is a real existential problem for the Israeli population, we want to have progress.
What's the alternative to the establishment of a Palestinian state?
A solution where the local population will not be under occupation anymore. There are many possible solutions in the world. There was some Irish, the Irish model. There is the idea that we are against sovereignty and against a possibility of a state that will one day aspire to have an army. Except of this, every solution is possible. We have 2 million Arabs in Israel, which are citizens of the state of Israel, but they are 20%. And they have all the rights. I guess most of the pharmacists in Israel are Arabs, Muslim Arabs, most of them. 40% of the doctors, Supreme Court judges, judges of all courts in Israel, and they are part of the Israeli society. I believe there is, the model of the European Union, where you can be a citizen of one country and live wherever you like. So if it goes towards peace, the more we go deeper into the atmosphere of peace, the more options will arise that may provide a solution. And one of them is time. We need time. What happens today cannot happen, will maybe not be different in 10 years. Look at the school books in Gaza and in Jenin of the West Bank, compare them to the school books in Arabic in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, and you see the difference. The moment in the West Bank and Gaza, the school books teaching the youth will be like in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, so then we will have many more options.
Okay, I mean, we're in a situation now where a plan has been put forward for an international force to be sent to Gaza. Those plans reportedly taking shape right now. Does that give you some sense of assurance that Gaza can be rebuilt and that two peoples can lead lives side by side in Gaza and in Israel without any security threat being posed by them?
The answer, we hope the answer is yes, because unlike the blue helmets in Lebanon, which only helped Hezbollah to build a force that was threatening the existence of the state of Israel, we hope that an army that will be headed, the force will be headed by the American president, will be one that will take the jobs that until now only the Israeli army did, destroying the tunnels, fighting terror, not allowing smuggled arms into Gaza. If it will be a peaceful attempt, so we hope it will. When we taste the pudding, we know what this taste is.
Right. I mean, what's your understanding of what the role of this ISF, this International Security Force, would actually be?
The role that to prevent smuggling arms into Gaza, building tunnels, destroying the existing tunnels, and making sure that Hamas is not a viable military force in Gaza.
I mean, disarming Hamas is obviously one of the next stages of this deal. I mean, how does that happen? Because, Hamas is part of the negotiating team, and presumably they don't want to disarm and disband themselves, do they?
I guess they don't want, but they signed an agreement, and they know what the agreement is. And one important part of this agreement is the disarmament of Hamas.
And what do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu's desired outcome is here?
I believe, look, Prime Minister Netanyahu has elections, the latest in November 26. Progress in the peace program, in the process, according to the Trump plan, towards peace with Saudi Arabia, with Syria, with Lebanon, of course, will help him, and it will serve him, but he will not take steps that may endanger Israel and open even a small window to a repeat of 7th of October.
You mentioned Lebanon just a moment ago, so let's move on to talking about Lebanon for a moment. We've heard the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz saying that the president of Lebanon is dragging his feet, this with respect to disarming Hezbollah. Why is he saying that? What do you make of this? Because
Hezbollah is trying all the time to break its commitments, and they try to rearm, and Israel is reacting every day, and I guess maybe today even is a bigger action in Lebanon than was in previous days. And because we will not repeat the mistake that we made last time, that there were minor breaches of the agreement. So we said, okay, let's not start a war on minor breaches. And then suddenly they collected 150,000 missiles and that were hidden behind the civilian population or in civilian houses. And that was a real threat on Israel, and we paid a big price to get rid of them, and we will not allow them to rebuild again. I know the army has problems, but it is in the best interest of Lebanon not to having an army within a state in parallel to the Lebanese army. There should be one army in Lebanon, the Lebanese army, and if they cannot take this mission themselves, we will help them.
Yeah, I mean,
whether they want it or not.
Yeah, Israel and the United States calling on Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, but I mean, much easier said than done, isn't it?
Probably. We knew that the Hezbollah will not do it voluntarily, even they committed themselves. So that's why we want to kill any problem, any breach, any start of a military machine of Hezbollah immediately when it's small, and not wait until it will be big and will be much harder. So yes, Israel should, if nobody else does it, we hope somebody else will do it. The best thing is the Lebanese army, But if nobody else does it, Israel will do it.
The Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, says he called for talks with Israel in mid-October, but he says Israel responded by intensifying airstrikes on southern Lebanon. What's your interpretation?
We don't have airstrikes on southern Lebanon or northern Lebanon or central Lebanon or Dahia. We have strikes on Hezbollah. Wherever they build a military machine or bases or military power of any kind, we will destroy it. But it's not against Lebanon, it's against Hezbollah. In a way, we are helping Lebanon by this. We do what they want to do and have not the strength. We dream to have a peace with Lebanon. It will serve both people. It will make the economy both in Israel and in Lebanon flourish. It will be a wonderful economic interest of both sides to do it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Michael Kleiner, Israeli politician and former leader of Herut. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we're going to take a look at how Gulf states are reshaping their maritime and defense strategies. Well, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are leading the push with new naval capabilities, investing in local shipbuilding, advanced defense technology, and major industrial partnerships. Well, it's all part of a drive for strategic autonomy and stronger regional security. We'll break down what this means for the region and the lessons for the wider GCC and Middle East North Africa defense landscape. Well, we're joined now by Akram Safar, who is a shareholder at CMN Naval, one of the world's leading naval shipbuilding groups with major investments and expansion plans right across the GCC. Thank you so much for talking to us, Akram. A pleasure to have you with us. I mean, you've got facilities and shipyards in a number of places around the world, notably France, Germany, the UK. And just for the benefit of our viewers, really, CMN stands for Construction Mécanique de Normandie, part of the broader CMN Naval Group, which is, I read, delivered more than 3,500 vessels and provided support to 48 different navies around the world over a period of around 8 decades. So you're highly established players. Just before we start talking about your activities specifically, we've seen global defense spending increase significantly in the last few years, particularly here in the Gulf. And I'm assuming that means CMN Naval is rather busy.
We're very busy, sir. I think if you look at global defense spending today, it has surged dramatically. The last 5 years has seen global defense spending go from roughly $2 trillion to almost $3 trillion today. And 10% of that is now being absorbed only by GCC states. If you look at global GDP and share of global GDP going to defense, it has also gone from 2% to 2.5%. And with pressure from mostly the United States, many countries in Europe are now even going higher towards 3%, and maybe the UK eventually 5%. So these are big tailwinds for the industry, and they're reshaping both the defense landscape, channeling unprecedented resources towards modernizing and capability building that navies around the world, including in the Gulf, so badly need.
Okay, so when we talk about the GCC and some pretty major investment and expansion plans across the region when it comes to shipbuilding, I mean, which countries are we talking about in particular?
I think, look, the two countries in the Gulf that are really leading the way are the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I think few regions carry as much maritime significance as the Gulf. It's a crossroads, as we know, of energy, logistics, trade, but 12% of global trade, nearly 30% of world container traffic, and 90% of global goods by volume move through this region. So this makes really the Gulf and the wider region, if you will, the arteries of trade. So it's in everybody's interest to keep them flowing and to avoid, clots in the system. The regional naval capability has gone from a buyer's market to a builder's market. Over the last 15 years, the UAE, mostly through Edge, the consolidated defense tech company, and Sami Industries in Saudi Arabia, have gone to being among the world's largest buyers to significant builders. That means transferring very sellable intellectual property to these host countries, developing it in country, and then not only meeting the domestic demand, but exporting abroad. We've seen that in the United States more than anywhere else so far in the region. On our side, CMN Naval, through our joint venture with EDGE, these are not really hypothetical ideas or selling points. I mean, it's happening as we speak. A major milestone came in 2022 when, together with EDGE, we signed a €1 billion export deal for very sophisticated corvettes. These are large ships, 72 meters in length, equipped with very, very sophisticated tech and weapon systems, which were exported to the Angolan Navy from Abu Dhabi. So all of the elements, all of the pieces were assembled in Abu Dhabi, purchased from Abu Dhabi, built in Abu Dhabi, and exported abroad. EDGE also recently signed with the Kuwaiti Naval Forces, a brotherly country of Kuwait in the Gulf, a $2 billion deal for other ocean patrol vessels and corvettes as well. So these real achievements really demonstrate the UAE's growing ability, not only, again, to meet local demand, but also to export capability and knowledge.
Okay, so you've raised a lot of really important points there. And just one takeaway I want to clarify is there's an urge, you're saying, to reduce reliance on foreign military imports and savoir-faire and shipbuilding. Is that basically it?
I think to a certain extent. I think we will never be, 100% autonomous or independent. I think no country is, probably minus, the US and China today. Even European major countries, share notes and share tech. But what I am saying is that more and more we'll be able to at least autonomize, if you will, the main components, so that we are able to build vessels like the ones behind me in country. And I think eventually we'll get there, probably 15 years from today, we'll be able to sovereignize, let's say, probably over 90% of a ship here in Abu Dhabi and also in Saudi Arabia and probably in all the other Gulf countries. Definitely.
Right. So, even if a ship is built here in the Gulf, there will be systems that have to come from other countries, obviously, when it comes to radar, missile systems and so on. That's not going to change, is it?
It's not going to change, but through strategic acquisitions, we'll bring a lot of that tech here. We will localize it, work on it, adapt it to our own operational needs, and over time that will become domestic tech. A week ago, I witnessed a live demo for an autonomous system, actually by a local company, TII. It's an Abu Dhabi homegrown company. And I promise you, their tech and their capabilities are equal, if not higher, than some European counterparts. I'm talking about unmanned softwares, obstacle avoidance, collision avoidance systems for unmanned high-speed interceptor boats. So these vessels were reaching 50 knots and avoiding obstacles autonomously with a human in the loop, but only observing what was going on, all from Musafah in Abu Dhabi. So we're moving at light speed. We have to keep up with the threats which are moving just as quick.
What are those threats that you're talking about? Because, there seems to be this push to invest in naval maritime defense in the region. What specific threats are you able to identify?
Yeah, I think it's warfare in general is changing tremendously, drastically, from a conventional theater to unconventional tools. I'm talking about asymmetric warfare. I'm talking about unmanned drones, and I'm talking about the enemies today being able to both order, construct, and build very cheap, cost-effective systems sometimes in their backyard or in their garages, which will fight and go against conventional, expensive, with scale and time innovation, these prices will go down. But that's what we're up against. So we're up against, in certain arenas, $3 or $4 million missile systems going against $20,000 online ordered, garage assembled drones. And in the past, we've seen the latter win. So our job is to give our navies, our customers around the world, the tools to command both conventional and unconventional means to keep up with the enemies and obviously to win.
Traditionally, the United States was the main security partner in this region. And I just wonder whether things are changing. Are partnerships evolving in this region, would you say?
I would say the UAE is a beacon of mutual coexistence. And if you look at our trade relations, we had the head of the EU today here, where we'll be signing also a comprehensive economic strategic agreement, a partnership agreement with the EU, but also an FTA. So I think, as a neutral player and as a strategic small country, we are, open for business with the US, with Europe, and with obviously our fraternal countries in the region. Then again, as I said, over time, I think we'll be able to become more and more autonomous and rely less on foreign tech, let's say.
I mean, all of this seems to mirror and dovetail very neatly with economic diversification goals across the region. I mean, we talk a lot on this channel about Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia. Do you think this sounds like it's very much in line with that desire to diversify and engage in activities that perhaps were not engaged in this region in years past?
100%. I think every shipyard, every design office that we're trying to bring, for example, here to Abu Dhabi, every research partnership contributes to the UAE's long-term diversification goals, which reinforces our position as a global hub for maritime tech, for advanced manufacturing, for AI. The days where shipbuilding is viewed as a legacy metal bashing industry are over. We're really, at the forefront. If I can give you a little example of what we're doing with AI, we're adopting our own AI assistant, sort of marine GPT, we call it, which helps crews wherever they are in the world, in whatever language they operate in, maintain vessels in real time. We also have an AI-driven predictive maintenance system that keeps fleets mission ready and cost efficient. Because you obviously have the upfront cost to purchase the vessel, and then you have the life cycle cost of the vessel over 30 years, and that's being stretched now, sometimes up to 40, 45 years. So with this AI-enhanced system, we're able to reduce this cost over the life cycle of the vessel by 40%. So that's something that shows you just how much tech and AI is at the forefront of this historically heavy industry, let's say, legacy business.
Just to wrap up this conversation, we've been talking about how homegrown defense and maritime innovation very much a focus in this region, Saudi Arabia and the broader GCC. And just to be clear, we're talking here, aren't we, about defense and trade. So, fair to say, an absolutely key priority in this region.
Oh, 100%. Definitely. I think the two go hand in hand together. And the more we'll be able, as I said, to keep those arteries of global trade open and smooth, the more trade we will transact. And, it's fascinating to close on this, as an Emirati citizen, for the UAE to go in just under 54 years from a small trading port to a global country of capital. Everyone always focuses on the capital, but there's also ideas, there's innovation, there's trade, and now there's also, within the defense sector, a thriving naval and wider defense industry, which is, again, leading domestically. And I really believe in the next 5 to 10 years, we will be competing and winning against legacy primes in Europe and beyond. Echoing the words of our Crown Prince, Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed bin Zayed, as Emiratis, we punch above our weight. And we'll continue to do so in this industry, empowering Emirati people, working together with foreigners to shape the future of naval innovation.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Akram Safa, shareholder at CMN Naval. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.